Somebody's radio TV's on.
Right. Good morning to you all who are present here at this press conference of the Working People's Alliance. The team for the Working People's Alliance today is Dr. David Hines, co-leader, Brother Rohit Kanai, co-leader, Brother Takuma Ogunse, also co-leader, and Brother Dennis Canterbury. I'm your host for the meeting. We want to welcome the press and welcome the public who are here with us this morning. To begin our press conference, we'll have a reading of the statement released by the WPA. To start with that will be Dr. David Hines, and then I will read another part of it, and then Dr. Canterbury will read the remaining section of the press conference. I hand you over now to Dr. David Hines.
Good morning to the members of the media and the public. It's good to be back at our weekly press conference. We took a couple of weeks off because of the budget debates that obviously attracted the attention of the media. The WPA and the PNC met this past week in another round of talks in pursuit of our earlier commitment to contest the upcoming general and regional elections as part of a broad coalition. A joint statement was released to the media and public after the meeting. WPA, however, takes this opportunity to give the media and the public its initial assessment of the meeting. The deliberations centered on two major issues: how to more effectively confront GCOM's continued reluctance to ensure that the joint opposition demands for free and fair elections are met, and secondly, how to strengthen the electoral coalition in preparation for the upcoming elections. As regards the GCOM issue, both sides agreed that GCOM's continued resistance to the use of biometrics at the upcoming elections pose a serious threat to the integrity of those elections. Consequently, it was agreed that the opposition is left with no alternative but to move to an intensification of the pressure on GCOM on multiple fronts. Given the ramifications of this undertaking, we agreed to set up a joint working committee to further address the related issues and make recommendations in this regard for consideration at the next meeting. In relation to the electoral coalition, WPA feels that we have made some progress. First, we took note of the PNC-APNU ongoing coalition talks with the AFC. It was agreed that the PNC-WPA talks would proceed based on its own dynamics. Given the WPA's stated commitment to joining the PNC and other parties in an electoral coalition, but its continued hesitancy about rejoining the APNU, the meeting agreed that there is need to find a mechanism to resolve this apparent dilemma. Another joint working committee was set up to make recommendations in this regard to the next meeting. Finally, the meeting spent much time discussing how a coalition of parties with varying electoral appeals and political capacities can work more harmoniously and effectively in pursuit of common goals. We view the setting up of the two joint working committees as a step in the direction of democratization of decision-making, an issue that haunted intra-party relations in the last coalition. We left the meeting more optimistic that the two parties share a commitment to coalition politics, both as an election strategy and as a means to a political solution to Guyana's ongoing ethno-political impasse. In this regard, we are optimistic that there will be a grand coalition to confront and defeat the PPP at the next election. Dion, you're muted. You're muted, Dion.
Sorry about that. I'm going to read the second part of the press conference on coalitions. And for our part, the WPA views coalitions in two phases. The first phase is electoral in nature, whereby parties form coalitions to compete for office. The second phase is nation building, whereby parties come together in a national government aimed at holding the disparate and contending forces in the society for the national good. Since our constitution does not accommodate post-election coalition governments, parties wishing to achieve this outcome must come together before the elections. WPA is pursuing a coalition with other opposition forces to defeat the PPP, which in our view has taken Guyana once again into the realm of autocratic rule. We do so with the full knowledge that our party lacks the electoral appeal to win an election on its own. Should we go into an election on our own, we risk splitting the opposition vote and ensuring a return of the PPP to power. Given the fact that our last three elections were decided by one seat, we are aware that the votes of a small electoral party such as the WPA could make the difference between keeping the PPP in or throwing them out of office. Those who have pledged their support to the WPA are adamant that they do so partly to ensure the latter. While the WPA concedes our electoral limitations, we make up for that with our political capacity and our ability to mobilize such capacity from within the ranks of our allies in the wider society. We also bring to any coalition a political integrity and independence that could lead to tangible outcomes in voter mobilization and accountable governance. We now
Civil society, WPA is shocked, but not surprised at the recent spate of revelations which point to potential, if not actual, corruption in the sale of public lands to selected individuals. WPA does not at this time pass judgment on the allegations. We await further information, which can only come from a fully independent probe. We therefore call for such an investigation as an urgent necessity. No democratic government, in the face of such damning allegations, can deny its citizens the satisfaction of knowing the full truth. That top government officials have already pronounced on the innocence of those at the center of the allegations only compounds the problem. By what authority are President Ali, Vice President Jagdeo, and Attorney General Nandlal empowered to be judge and jury on allegations which implicate officials of the government and state? WPA says Guyana is not a monarchy. The Constitution empowers the government to be managers of the day-to-day activity of the state in accordance with the laws of the land, but not to circumvent the laws or set the government up as substitute for the law. The issue of government facilitating the transfer of state assets to favored individuals and groups, often devoid of transparency and below market value, is not a new one. WPA had strenuously lobbied for the institution of the State Assets Recovery Agency, SARA, as both a deterrent and a mechanism for recovering such assets. The agency, which came into being during the previous government, was promptly disbanded by this government on its return to office. WPA cites the correlation of this action and the rapid increase of allegations of giveaway of state assets to friends of the government. As we await a full probe of the latest allegations, WPA invokes Professor Clive Thomas's warning of the criminalization of the state under the previous PPP government. We see a resurgence of that criminalized state and point to its more deadly consequences for Guyana in the era of oil and gas. Consequently, we call for the reinstatement of SARA.
PPP sees a seamless victory lap. The Working People's Alliance draws attention to the PPPC's government's shameless victory lap for passing the record 1.38 trillion 2025 national budget with little or no inputs from the political opposition and civil society organizations, which is a clear sign of a rapidly developing authoritarian petrostate in Guyana. The government is recklessly spending the people's money on uncoordinated projects in the absence of sufficient budgetary review to determine if the money is being spent efficiently. The WPA repeats its call for the Guyana government's due diligence in undertaking and funding development projects and for a democratic process in formulating the country's national budget.
WPA notes that while the revelations of government's alleged involvement in giving away of state lands are in the headlines, the High Court has denied the victims of the Mocha Arcadia home demolition incident compensation for the demolition of their homes on public lands by the very government. We have not seen the written judgment of the learned Chief Justice, but we wonder if the scales of justice have been even-handed. WPA respects the authority and integrity of the court, but it wonders whether enough consideration was given to the circumstances in which the entire episode unfolded. We wonder if the court has now given license to the government to violently destroy people's property and livelihood in pursuit of its agenda. We wonder if enough attention was paid to the human rights violation by the government in pursuit of its goals. We wonder if the court has now put poor people at the mercy of a government that is blatantly anti-poor in its practice. WPA stands in solidarity with the Moko Arcadia victims and other victims of state bullyism and violence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for the reading of the press statement released by the Working People's Alliance. I'm now going to open the conference to the media for any questions that you may have in relation to this statement.
Good morning, Svetlana Marshall, News Source.
Good
Dr.
morning.
Luke, you spoke about the meeting with, I suspect, the PNC. Could you say when the meeting was held? You also spoke about a committee being established to discuss past issues under the coalition as we know it. What are some of the key issues the WPA would be putting on the table that you think must be addressed in order for this partnership to move forward? I'll just leave those two for now, and then I'll ask the rest.
Well, the meeting was held last Wednesday, and the two working committees that were set up were, one, a committee was set up to advise the next meeting on what steps the joint opposition, in particular the WPA and the PNC, should take to push back against GCOM's resistance to the implementation of biometrics. We agreed that biometrics are imperative, along with a clean voters list, and that the absence of those mechanisms pose a serious threat to the integrity of the election. But we felt that we needed to hear, we needed more details on how we are going to move forward, what kind of protests we are going to mount, what kind of activities we are going to advance. As is well known, the WPA has proposed publicly and proposed at the meeting that we should have a three-pronged approach. First, that we should have intensified public activity. Second, that we should engage CARICOM governments and other international stakeholders in an official way. And thirdly, we should explore possibilities of going to court to seek judicial review on whether it is GCOM's place to determine the timeline for an election, or whether that is the function of government. We felt that we needed a more structured proposal to consider. And it is in that regard that we agreed to set up a joint working committee, that is a committee that includes members from the PNC and members from the WPA, to advise the next meeting on what measures should be taken given the broad areas that we have agreed on. The second working committee was set up to resolve the issue of WPA's participation in a coalition outside of the APNU. At this point, the WPA continues to be hesitant about participating, about going back, into the APNU. However, the APNU is a reality. The APNU is an electoral brand name. And so therefore, there seems to be some tension in that regard. And so we decided to, again, put that matter to a joint working committee, which would come up we hope, with some form of resolution to that dilemma, and we would consider it at the next meeting.
Yeah, but hello?
Yes, somebody's, I think Anassa has some background feedback there. Yes.
One sec, I'm trying to get it muted. Can somebody mute me? It's not allowing me to mute it.
Svetlana, you finished?
No, sir, I was going to ask, I know you said that, yes, you were addressing the committee with respect to the coalition and having a resolution in place to be presented to the larger parties.
To the
What I
larger
wanted
joint
to know,
meeting, yes. To the, we are
yes, the
scheduled to meet
larger
them, right.
joint meeting,
Yes.
meaning WPA and PNC. What I want to know, clearly, what are some of the key issues that must be resolved given your past experience, that if not resolved, you probably would not partner with the PNC or the APNU? What are those issues?
We are committed to partnering in a coalition. That is
Oh,
beyond. Well, we are committed to partnering. We are just hesitant in going back into the APNU, but we recognize that that presents some practical problems. For example, what is the ballot going to look like if the PNC manages to agree with the APNU and the three parties, meaning the AFC, WPA, and the APNU parties going to a coalition? Is it going to be APNU, AFC, WPA? What is going to be? We recognize that there are those practical issues. And so therefore we decided to throw it to the committee to come up with recommendations in that regard. So it's really a matter of logistics. But no, it's not a matter of the coalition. We have signed off on the coalition. WPA will be going into coalition with PNC, and the PNC, as said, the same. So, but it's a matter of working out the logistics of how WPA being outside of the APNU, how that will play itself out in a practical way.
Okay, is there a timeline for the that resolution with respect to the going back to the larger joint meeting?
We did not set a timeline, but we expect to meet after the Mashramani celebrations, as you know, that are coming up in a couple of weeks. So we anticipate that will give the joint committees enough time to deliberate and come back to us. So I would say that by the last week of February, we should get the recommendations of the committee.
Okay then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
If nobody else has a question, with respect to biometrics, recently the chairman would have stated, well, she doesn't oppose capturing fingerprint digitally, and there was need for the hiring of a consultant, a technical consultant to, advise the commission and how the fingerprinting aspect could be captured digitally, but said that cannot be done simultaneously with preparations for general elections. I know that the committee is going to deal with that also, but what is the practicality of having this done simultaneously? What's your take on that?
Well, the WPA continues to believe that the chairman of GCOM is using delaying tactics to ensure that this vital necessity for a free and fair election is not put in place. She has said that, it is not, the Constitution does not prevent biometrics. There needs to be laws passed by the National Assembly to ensure that this happens. the opposition has said that it is ready to go in that direction. Now she's saying that, look, we can have fingerprint at registration, but it's not going to be used for the next election. We are saying to the chairman, get on with it. Start the process. The commissioners nominated by the opposition have formally made a recommendation to start the process, and let us see where it goes. Start the process. If you say the process has to be started by capturing fingerprinted registrations, just start the process. Your business, Madam Chair, is not to talk about the timeline for elections. Your business, GCOM's business, is to put in place mechanisms to ensure the most free and fair election. Leave the matter of the timeline to the executive and legislative branches of government. In 1990, we faced the same situation where there were things that were recommended to be done, including the setting up of this very GCOM mechanism, and that they could not be done by the stipulated election date. And the PNC government at the time went to Parliament and asked for an extension. This was agreed to by the PPP and other opposition parties, and the election was postponed for 22 months to allow GCOM to do what it is supposed to do. The chair of GCOM at that time did not say that it can't be done. He left that to the government, and the government, as I said, went to Parliament, and Parliament made the necessary change in the timeline. It is not the function of the GCOM chair to determine the timeline. And so WPA says, get on, start the process. You are saying that this process can be done. Let's start the process. If you feel that you need to have expert advice, then get your expert advice and start the process. But don't say that it can be done before election. That is not the remit of GCOM.
Just
Dr.
one-
Hines, I see. Oh, go ahead, Svetlana, you still?
I looked at the statement issued by the GCOM, and it made specific reference to capturing fingerprint digitally for registration purpose. Do you think the opposition is kind of confusing the two, whether they're doing it digitally for registration and that which the opposition is pressing for biometrics, enhanced biometrics, to be used during the course of the elections, meaning at the polling stations? Is it the same thing you're talking about?
No,
or?
we're not talking about the same thing. The chair has thrown that in, as I have explained, as a delay mechanism. She thinks that she's throwing something at the opposition. Okay, they're calling for biometrics. Well, I'm not going to give them that, but I'm going to say we're going to capture fingerprints at registration. No, we want the fingerprints to be captured at the place of polling. Now, if she's saying that she needs expert advice, we say go ahead and get your expert advice. And that is the first step towards enhanced biometrics. If she wants to capture it at the point of registration, that's our business. That's not our demands.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I see Guyana Chronicle. Please identify a name and then ask your question.
Good morning, Naomi Paris for the Guyana Chronicle. Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
All right. So Dr. Hines, my question's for you. There seems to be a clear breakdown in the coalition talks, given the indecisiveness of who would lead the alliance. What role does the WPA play in this process? And if possible, could you say who would be your party's choice to lead this coalition, this potential coalition?
Well, as we have reported here, Ms. Paris, there's no breakdown in talks between the WPA and the PNC. Those talks are moving ahead, as we have explained here. I think you may be referring to the other talks between the PNC and the AFC. Is it that you're referring to?
Yes, correct.
Yes, they're two separate talks, okay? WPA does not wish to comment on the talks between the AFC and the PNC. Those questions are better put to those two parties. In relation to your question as to who is the WPA's candidate to lead the coalition, we are saying that we first must come up with criteria for choosing the presidential candidate. WP and PNC have not reached that point yet. When we reach that point, WPA will make known its recommendations for criteria. Once we put the criteria in place, that then will determine who would be the best candidate that suits the criteria.
All right, just following up, you mentioned that there are some practical issues with joining the coalition. Could you say what these are?
Well, practical issues with WPA rejoining the APNU, they're not practical issues with the coalition. The WPA and the PNC have agreed that we are going to go to the elections together as part of a coalition. So there are no issues there. The WPA is hesitant about getting back into the APNU. And I suppose that's what you're asking. What are the issues?
Yeah, what are the issues?
I will allow my co-leader, Brother Takumo Gunse, to answer that question.
Okay, there are a number of issues, but for us, the most important one is that we feel that we had to learn lessons of the previous coalition, and we have said over and over that the decision-making mechanism or approach that was used by Comrade Granger had the effects of marginalizing all the political parties in the coalition, including his own party, the PNC. And that was brought out clearly when, after the WPA had cause to protest on some other issues, which I don't want to take up divert from, led to Robert Corbyn being appointed by the APMU and Granger to meet with all the constituent parties in the APMU for them to understand the grievance. And that process went on, and Corbyn's support produced his report. And if anyone read that report, all the parties were unanimous in expressing their concern that the way in which decisions were made in the coalition was not in the best interest of the coalition, and by extension, not in the best interest of the country. Because on major issues, the parties that were responsible to making the government become a government were really excluded. And we learned some of those issues, some of those decisions in the newspapers. In fact, the major decisions were made in the cabinet. And our understanding of a cabinet is that the cabinet is supposed to be carrying out the directives of the political party that constitute, that brought them into being, and that they have the responsibility to the day-to-day and the technical implementation of proposals given to them by the constituent parties that constitute the APMU. we are also concerned that as a political party, the WPA has to pay some attention to its own existence as a political electoral party. And for the last three, at least the last three elections, we contest as part of a coalition. We contest first, okay, as a partnership in the APMU. Then we contest 2 elections as part of the APMU plus AFC coalition. And our party is concerned that that format has denied the WPA from building its electoral identity as a distinct political electoral party. And we are concerned that going forward, our members are formed that we have to take that into consideration. Because the fact of the matter is the big party, like the PNC, whatever form they choose to contest, because of the historical logic and the historical strength, they are not affected to the extent to which the WPA and other small parties are affected. Nobody asks the PNC what they bring to a coalition or what is the PNC strength. It is taken for given. But they were asked the WPA that because the WPA last contestation in an election in its own name is many decades ago. And they use that as the reference point. So we have survived and continue to be a political force, both electorally and otherwise, but we have no way, okay, of tangibly saying this is what the WPA represent electorally in terms of votes. And we have to be subject to other people's valuation and interpretation of what we represent. And we feel that is not a very comfortable position to be in, and it doesn't hold, a great future for the party. So though I want to reduce it to those 2 points. There are other issues, but I think those are the 2 main issues that worries the WP.
Okay, I do have another question for Mr. Hines. I'd like to shift your attention to talk a little bit about Mr. Hughes entering into a land agreement with an individual who did not possess documents of ownership. I'm asking this in the context of whether instances like this would be good for the image of a coalition.
As WPA said in the statement we read earlier, that we are not ready to pass judgment on any of the allegations. We are calling for an independent probe of all the allegations, not only the allegations made by the government against Mr. Hughes, but allegations that are made against other individuals. As you notice, we stayed away from calling names in the press statement. We feel that all that is coming to the public attention, there are allegations, and there are allegations that must be investigated, all of them. And I think I've read in the media that Mr. Hughes himself has said that he's not opposed to such an investigation that involves his own land transaction. So the WPA is not prepared to pass judgment on Mr. Hughes or any other person accused until we hear from an independent probe of the allegations.
I do have one last question. I know the WPA in the past has raised concern about its voice not being heard in a grand collation. In this context, do you think that Mr. Hughes would acknowledge the WPA's contribution and allow you to be actively participate in a coalition?
That's a loaded question. First of all, we didn't say that our voice is not being heard in a grand coalition. We are fighting for a grand coalition precisely because we feel in a grand coalition our voice will be heard. We are saying that when we are subsumed in the APNU, our voice is stifled there, not in a grand coalition. All right? So we want to make that clear. I think you may be confusing a little bit the APNU, which is a separate partnership from the larger coalition that include the APNU parties and the AFC. In a grand coalition, we are saying like the AFC, we want our voice to be heard. And we feel it is better heard in a grand coalition in which we go into that coalition in our own name, rather than as APNU, where our name is stifled. As regards to Mr. Hughes, where do you think? I think you should ask Mr. Hughes that question. I'd be glad to hear his answer.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Okay, thank you. Let me ask Brother Rohit Kanai if he has any comments, if they're in relation to all that has been said. Brother Rohit?
Are you hearing me? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we are.
I think it's rather ironic that we are calling for biometrics in relationship to the PPP's intransigence to pave the way for free and fair elections. We had broad public involvement in 1989 to 1992 in a determined attempt to ensure elections were free and fair, given past histories of elections. So we have now come the full circle where the PPP, which should have a vested interest to prove elections are free and fair, is engaged in blocking that pathway. This is remarkable, given the fact Guyana is a divided society along racial lines and in a petro-state. Now, petro-states are known for its volatility in relationship to participation in the oil economy by different sectors. So at this point in time, it is necessary that we have a democracy in the authentic sense of the word. What we call democracy in Guyana is a system of winner takes all. And in a race-based society, it's obviously not the best way to proceed in a democratic arrangement for governance. So we are faced at this point in time where the PPP has a vested interest, if it wants to have a united Guyana, but instead continues in a way that will surely divide this nation if we do not have ways and means of ensuring that the results of the election is accepted by all. I think that is the most pressing issue at this point in time.
Right. Let me turn to the press. Brother Ogun, do you have any other comment you want to make?
Okay, on coalition politics, and I think we and the WPA will continuously be engaged in this topic, not only because we have the ongoing coalition discussions, which is the major concerns for the opposition supporters to guarantee that we confront the PPP in the grand coalition. And, okay, that determines that we have to be constantly discussing coalition and reporting on those talks. But the WPA also want to take the opportunity, because at this heightened point of people's concern about coalition, we want to take the opportunity to fight for a new, more mature standards among opposition support base, because we believe that it is one thing to say that coalition represents the future politics and the future political design of the country going forward. But we are convinced that if the masses don't embrace the process and don't, in a real way, take ownership of the process, then coalition politics may not work as effectively as we all may want it to work. So in this ongoing struggle to build the grand coalition, we want to take the opportunity to struggle with opposition constituents, our supporters, for them to recognize that they have a role to play, not only in putting pressure on us to get the grand coalition against the PPP, but they also have to accept a responsibility after we won the elections to ensure that the coalition function based on the principles agreeing and their standards. And that role, has to be done, in our view, in a big way by the coalition support base. So we're fighting for coalition supporters to move out of this backward doctrine that you can't discuss dirty linens in public. This backward doctrine about big party and small party and who bring what and who bring, those are things that we have noted surface in a real problematic way after we won government. And we say we have to learn the lessons, because in our view, those two things help in a big way to the defeat of the coalition in the last elections. So we want to urge our supporters, as you push us forward, you begin to accept a responsibility in this engagement to ensure that you participate at every level of the process. And we think that will enhance the overall political culture in the country. So yes, we will be updating you with the developments in terms of the discussions and the talks, but we will also be using the opportunity to begin to insist in your political consciousness, your responsibility to the coalition and for the coalition and for the success of the coalition going forward. Now, on the question of corruption, there is no doubt, nobody could deny that the level of corruption in this country has reached unprecedented levels in the history of the country. And this matter became what it is basically under the PPP from 1992 to the present. The PPP was in power except for the period of 2015 to 2020. So whatever Guyana has become in terms of corruption has to be placed at the foot of the PPP. They are the ones who are responsible. And after 2020, with the oil money, they have pushed this matter to new levels. And I don't think that there could be any disputing that the PPP has played the biggest role in the corruption dilemma the country finds itself. And we, the WPA, are convinced that the PPP cannot resolve this problem, have no interest in resolving the problem, and that the problem could only be resolved in Guyana when we remove the PPP from office and when we have a new government in place, and ultimately when the politics reach a point of having a national government. So we feel that corruption will continue to be a major political question for any government. This present government and new government will face the challenge and the test. And it cannot be achieved by the actions of any one political party. It has to be achieved by a national consensus and a national commitment to deal with these horrors. Now, one last point is SARA. And I felt I got to say a few things because I worked with SARA in SARA when it was established. And as the WPA statement made very clear, that the PPP saw SARA from its inception as an enemy to the PPP. And as soon as it returned to office, it shut SARA down. And we in SARA had done very important work with all the agencies that are responsible for state lands and state land distribution and so forth in the country. We have worked with them to put in place systems of accountability. We had a regular, updates and meetings with them. And we had prepared, the basis for there to be more transparency in these matters. But the PPP, as soon as it came to power, it decided to close SARA down, and it decided, and in so doing, in our judgment, it opens the floodgate to land corruption and corruption in general, and the stealing of state assets by persons who are in a position to do so. So yes, the closing of SARA was deliberate by PPP. The consequences of it was the floodgates of corruption was open, and I support the party's position that we need to reinstate SARA. And we in the WPA will fight in any new government for the rest to reinstating the State Asset Recovery Agency and the development of that agency to be a deterrent to land theft and theft of wider state properties, assets, and also, more importantly, to develop the capacity to get those assets returned to the state. We think that the country badly needs such an agency, more so in the context of Guyana becoming a petrol state, where the possibilities of political functionaries and bureaucrats in the system could take out of the system millions of US dollars, no, not Guyana dollars, US dollars. And this become extremely important, that the fight against corruption, whether we like it or not, will be a continuous struggle. And we need an agency like SARA, along with all the other agencies, SUKU, the police, and everybody, to fight this evil.
Thank you,
If I
Brother
may just
Ogun. Yes, sir.
This matter of corruption is not a simple matter. All governments in the history of humanity has had to contend with corruption because governments control a lot of resources. But when you have the kind of resources, the kind of money that is coming into Guyana, corruption then moves from simple corruption to criminality. You see, this area is about crimes against the country. It's not just ordinary corruption. Guyana becomes a haven for these white-collar criminals and financial criminals. And that is why we are calling for a probe, because we think that there is a lot that is under the cover that is coming out. We have been hearing all kinds of allegations. And given our knowledge of how resources are being frittered out of the country, we are sure that there is a lot more that is happening. And the key here is the collusion of the state. That the state itself has become a criminal entity. What we call the criminalization of the state, that you cannot make a distinction between the white collar criminals and the state itself. The state has become, for the WPA, a facilitator, an actor in this criminal enterprise. And that is why the vice president and others are so quick to pronounce on the innocents. Who gives them that authority? Because in pronouncing on the innocents, they are protecting themselves. They are protecting themselves. So this is a clear and present danger to our country when we become the neighborhood for international gangsters and criminals who are coming here and engaging in the worst kinds of thievery. Then all of us are in danger. The court has just denied compensation to poor people who lost their homes and their livelihood because they were on state lands and the state wanted the lands for roads. And the same state and government are giving away those lands to gangsters. But yet, our court is not compensating poor people who are being thrown off their lands by the state. And so therefore, we are at a serious impasse as far as this corruption is concerned. It should not be taken lightly.
All right, I want to make one other injection. If you have been following, there is a post on Facebook, the whole question of biometrics and the cleaning up of the list, where Jack Bio himself is the speaker and he is advocating for biometrics and for a clean voters list. When you're out of power, it seems as though there is one kind of game that you play. And when you get into power, there is a different ball game. This is not the first time that we have seen the deception of the PPP in this regard. When the teachers struck, we also had similar comments from the now president and in relation to the teachers' salary. What about the teachers? What about the nurses? And so on. So we're dealing with people who do not have integrity and honesty as part of their being. And we need to recognize that. So when Jack Bio makes the statement that there is no need for an investigation, we understand where he's coming. All right, and we need to appreciate the nature of the beast that we're dealing with. Is there any question or any comment from the press as we move towards the closing of this?
I see. Is it that Gyno Chronicle has her hand up there? No, may not be. I don't know.
I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay, then if there are no questions, then I want to thank you all for being with us this morning at this press conference of the Working People's Alliance. Thanks to the press for being here again, and thanks to the public who are viewing online our regular meeting. We have resumed, as Dr. Hines did say, our weekly conference because the budget has now been passed and we are moving forward in relation to the events of the country. Do have a good afternoon. It's past 12, and we see you next week, same time, for another conference of the Working People's Alliance. So the panelists, I want to thank you also for being here. I look forward to having you next week, same time. Goodbye.
Kidaki,
Okay, good press conference. I think everybody has left.
everybody done?
Yeah,
Right.
well, not everybody, the press. Can we address the TUC meeting? Which day is